All right, guys, welcome to Office Hours, episode 12. I'm your host, Davis Hunt, editor-in-chief of the Pamphleteer. We've got a good show for you today. As usual, we're going to run through the past week in Pamphleteer coverage, which, if you haven't joined us before, is kind of a mix of local and national stuff from the perspective of someone who lives in Nashville, myself. And we'll be talking later in the show with Isaac Simpson, otherwise known as Disgraced Propagandist, about a variety of topics. Isaac has some experience writing for alt weeklies. He wrote for the LA Weekly for a long time, and the Pamphleteer ultimately derives its spirit from the alt weekly. We're kind of a digital recreation of that, with all the political baggage that has accumulated around these media properties jettisoned to the side. And Isaac has some experience witnessing the downfall of the alt weekly, so we're going to talk about that. He's also got a marketing agency called Will that we're going to talk about, among a variety of other topics. So let's kick this off. Last week at the Pamphleteer. First up, we usually go through some interesting real estate developments. I usually focus on bars because I think that's kind of the so-called third place in a town like Nashville. This is Skinny Dennis's in Brooklyn. They've announced that they're going to build a location here in Nashville. If you're watching this on video, you can see in the lower left-hand corner, that's the building they're going to occupy. If you're familiar with Nashville and you're driving down Gallatin away from 5 Points, you go past the Cobra on your left. It's right there next to that Circle K that's so famously open late at night. There's been a lot of kind of weeping and gnashing of teeth about this, an authentic honky-tonk launching in East Nashville, and people are kind of upset about it. I actually think it's a good thing, contrary to my nativist bona fides, because Nashville does need more small venues like this. And I think it's kind of a sign of health. There's clearly a market opportunity for a cool, divey music venue. If you go further down Gallatin, you have my favorite venue in town, Dee's Country Cocktail Lounge. But Skinny Dennis's will make a good addition. Like I said, there's one in Brooklyn already. It's named after Skinny Dennis, who played the upright bass most famously for Guy Clark. He was based out of LA, so not really a Nashville, kind of a Western sounding country musician. But the guy was 6'11", 135 pounds, because he had Marfan syndrome. And what I found pretty fascinating is that he died at the age of 28 on stage playing the bass at Captain Jack's in Sunset Beach with John Malcolm Penn. And I can't think of a better way to go if you're a musician than dying on stage. Doing what you love. So I look forward to checking this spot out. I think it's set to open in 2024. Next, this is the Southern Turf Club, which is occupying the Southern Turf building on 4th Avenue in Nashville. You might recognize this building. It's been neglected for as long as I've been alive. There used to be a saloon there, and I'm not sure what the exact history of it is, but the owner has taken it over. I think it's Icon Hospitality. I can't remember the name of the hospitality company, but they're making it kind of one of these members only clubs where you have to have a membership. It looks very nice. There's a 17th century bench once owned by John Milton, a 1916 bottle of Rip Pappy Van Winkle, worth $35,000. It'll be an interesting place. I got a couple of images in here just to kind of convey the ambiance. My big thing about bars is that the lighting has to be on point. I hate going into bars that make me feel like I'm in a doctor's office, fluorescent lights and this kind of thing. They seem to understand this. When you go to a bar, you kind of want to hide. You don't want to be exposed to the elements, so to speak. There's nothing worse than going to a bar or a place that advertises itself as a pub or a bar and just being bathed in artificial light. They seem to understand this. So this is a vibey, cool place. I think the capacity is 70 people. And yeah, So I'll look forward to that opening. Well, it's actually open now. So you can probably look it up, Southern Turf Club. Probably pay for a membership. I'm not really sure. I'll probably end up checking it out here in the next couple of weeks. Next up, we got a new dive in East Nashville called Schulman's. This is from the guys that have Skulls, Rainbow Room, House of Cards, the Johnny Cash Museum, Sinatra Bar and Lounge. This kind of reminds me of places that I would run into in Eagle Rock when I lived in Los Angeles. It's kind of this, I don't know, late night diner. Kind of in Nashville, we have Dino's, which kind of echoes this similar sentiment. This one looks like it's a little more elevated, if I had to use that word. I've got a picture of the location. It's taking over the old Southern Grist Brew Works, which is over where the old Family Wash used to be in East Nashville. And interesting part of town, Vinyl Tap is right catty-cornered in that picture from it. So those are 3 bars opening up in Nashville. Skinny Dennis's in a mile and a half from 5 Points. We got Southern Turf Club downtown on 4th Avenue. And we got Schulman's over by the old Family Wash. If that doesn't make sense to you, then you're not from here. I like to say that. Don't worry. The Family Wash has been closed for like 10 years. I probably only went there once. All right, next up, reading the news. So earlier, I think Wednesday last week, I published this piece, which was kind of an exploration of trying to create a narrative out of a net of headlines. And at the time, it kind of all got destroyed by what happened over the weekend. But, the original intent was to tie Janet Yellen conceding that the U.S. is too reliant on China. On Tuesday, Matt Gaetz launched the successful ouster of Kevin McCarthy. Wednesday, the Biden administration announced its intent to complete the border wall. And Friday, or that same day, Newsmax came out with this kind of absurd article about how the FBI was monitoring Trump supporters as a terrorist organization. I put together this. I feel like it was pretty elegant, a narrative tying all that stuff together that was totally undermined by the invasion of Israel by Hamas on Saturday. So the one thing that does remain is the Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift relationship, which, in my opinion, and I think I'm not alone on this front, is a totally manufactured, PR-oriented relationship. Famously, this looks like a meme. Kelce is shilling Pfizer vaccines. What was the most strange part about it, though, was this column in the Wall Street Journal from Rick Riley, who used to be great to read. If you remember, he was the guy that would have the final page in Sports Illustrated, which I read religiously as a kid. And the headline of this is, if anyone should be worried about Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, it's Trump. And he's got this great sentence in here. What if this is Rick Riley writing. What if they decided a fun couples thing to do would be to, I don't know, save democracy? Kate, that's his nickname for the couple, could stir up voters from homecoming queens to assisted living grandpas, from Castro Street to Wall Street, and rock polling places the way they rock stadiums. I'd be embarrassed if I were Rick Riley to consciously write a sentence like that after maybe it's been a while since I've read Rick Riley. I haven't really tracked his career. I admittedly kind of fell off the sports journalism track when I turned, I don't know, when I was 18, I guess, and stopped reading as much sports journalism. But I don't remember when I was reading him when I was younger, him putting together sentences like this. It also brings into question, what's the purpose of this relationship? So there's 2 things that you should know here. One main thing, and this is not conspiratorial at all. Taylor Swift has talked openly about this. Taylor Swift's music, the original recordings to many of her albums, and she's been going through the process of re-recording them, that's why you've seen her re-releasing albums, is owned by George Soros. And if I were to put on my conspiracy hat, I would assume that this is some kind of PR operation where Kelce has got a PR rep and they're trying to figure out how to boost his profile. In some, the Pfizer advertisement is one way that they do that. This faux relationship with Taylor Swift is another way. And what Taylor Swift gets out of this is she gets inroads. She's been a rabid supporter of voter registration and kind of ginning up support for various political candidates. Every single time there's an election in Nashville, Taylor Swift will step in and either tacitly or passively endorse a candidate. During the congressional race back in 2022, she endorsed Heidi Campbell, who had no chance of winning. Nonetheless, Taylor Swift came in and posted a picture of her voting and that whole thing. So if I had to guess, this is like a way for Taylor Swift to expand her net of influence into the NFL crowd, which I wish I had put this in the slideshow, but there was this great graph I saw today about the political affiliation of various sports fans. And, it's like the standard access of it's, liberal to conservative. And then on the y-axis, it's voter participation, how many of them vote. And the NFL is moderately high in terms of voter participation and right in the middle in terms of political affiliation. So if I were someone kind of strategizing about how to sway voters away from someone like, I don't know, Donald Trump, I might target the NFL. It's a huge fan base, and as this bit of information reveals, could be subject to some persuasion. So yeah, that's that. That's reading the news. That's what you do when you read the news every day. You start to concoct theories and drive yourself a little insane sometimes, but that's all right. We stick to local stuff around here. The reason I did this is because Taylor Swift. She's from Nashville, or got her start here. Last thing before we start our conversation with Isaac is Palmer Luckey gave a great talk at the, what's it called? The All-In Summit in Miami. And that's like Shamath, a bunch of Jason Calacanis. They do this podcast that I can't really stand Jason Calacanis. He kind of really annoys me. But anyway, they put on this summit for, tech adjacent people. And Palmer gave this great talk on titled, hold on, I've got it written down here, sorry. The title was "The Current Time is Too Late for the Current Thing." And it's all about how Silicon Valley was built on the bedrock of supporting, and a lot of it from financial support from the defense industry in the US, and how it's kind of reneged on that relationship with the defense industry. And you have companies like Google cowing and not refusing to work with the U.S. military for ethical reasons or some other such thing. And it's resulted in this environment in Silicon Valley where there's been more mattress unicorns like Casper, and I can't remember the name of the couple other ones, than there have been defense industry unicorns. Palmer Luckey's new defense company, Anduril, has refuted that. They're probably worth a couple billion now. They just raised $1.5 billion at the end of last year. And, it was a very insightful talk that I would really recommend watching. It's only 20 minutes. It kind of lays out in very explicit terms the compromises that the tech industry has made to enrich itself at the expense of a lot of national security or the greater interest of the country, I suppose. And how they're taking talent away from the defense industry, this and that. Like here's just kind of a blurb. In 1947, Stanford received half of its engineering budget from the Department of Defense. The Pentagon was constructed in 16 months. So in the period following World War II, between World War II and well into the 60s, the U.S. was extremely innovative and productive. And the Pentagon was constructed in 16 months. The Manhattan Project was completed in 3 years. The Apollo mission put a man on the moon in under a decade. Between 1951 and 1959, the U.S. built 5 generations of fighter jets, 3 generations of bombers, 2 classes of carriers, and nuclear-powered submarines. Luckey says, if you look at the current state of the defense industry, we're lucky to do even one of these things in a decade. He attributes it to kind of the post-Cold War malaise and I guess lack of conflict. And I described it as the atrophy of uncontested affluence that allowed people to take this principled stand against working on defense projects, which frankly to me sound cool as shit. Like if I'd been offered jobs in the defense industry, I might still be working in tech. But I didn't know anything about that. Everyone was talking about, if you wanted to get rich in tech, it was like figure out a way to make an app that you would sell to Google or Facebook. Anyway, I highly recommend watching that talk. Another thing he talks about is, let's see. Sorry, I'm looking. See, I write these things and then I have to pick through them. Right here. He goes further explaining how Apple, Google, and other companies' principled stand against working with the DoD is not motivated by concern for what's best for the country in the long term, but rather by a desire to keep access to Chinese markets and investment capital. You hear a lot. I've never heard the conflict of interest between Silicon Valley and China, or just in general, American economic interest in China laid out so succinctly as the way that he put it. Because clearly, if Google were to agree to work with the Department of Defense, for example, or Apple, or whatever large tech company there is, they would have to make, they would either not be able to work with China or would have to do some other such thing and would lose access to the market. And I think that says it all. Another little interesting fact is he talks about how Snapchat's AR lens technology is more than anything utilized by the military. So yeah, that's an interesting talk that I would really recommend checking out if you have the time. So that's it for what we've done this past week at the Pamphleteer. Next up is my guest, Isaac Simpson, otherwise known as Disgraced Propagandist on Twitter. Isaac is the founder of Will, a dissident marketing agency, and a gonzo writer formerly for Vice, LA Weekly, and more. He now maintains a blog called The Carousel, which is very popular, and hosts a podcast there and contributes to other publications like The American Mind. So I'm going to bring Isaac up here, and we're going to chat. Isaac, how you doing?
Good. What's up, man? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Nice.
I see it still. The sun's still up. You must be in LA.
It is. Yes, I'm in LA.
Cool. Well, we were talking before this, and I didn't realize that you had. I mean, I admittedly had not scored your bio until we were kind of talking, but I didn't realize that you had, worked for the LA Weekly, and the way that I pitch the Pamphleteer to people is it's always like a digital alt weekly. And I frequently have to explain what that is to people because, I don't know, it depends on where you grow up. Like people know the Village Voice, but I don't know if they understand it as like an alt weekly. So I'm very curious about your experience writing for the LA Weekly and kind of witnessing its, evolution and it's probably the same thing that happened with the Nashville scene here in town. Is it quickly jettisoned any capable people and replaced them with people who are kind of just willing to parrot whatever the talking point is.
So what is your question exactly?
Well, yeah, you wrote for the LA Weekly. So I'm just kind of curious about your history writing for the LA Weekly. It's kind of what we do.
Yeah, well, I would say that, I track the moment everything changed. And more people are kind of agreeing with me on this to 2013, 2014. That was the moment that something happened in culture. I have my idea of what it was, but we don't have to get into that if you don't want to offend your listeners. But and I was actually in several different places, very key places, like in the power structure at that time. And LA Weekly was definitely one of them. And so I saw pretty clearly inside LA Weekly what was happening. I was one of maybe 5 like columnist writers for them. So I basically had an open door every week to write something, or every whatever time. Sometimes they were published in print, sometimes they were published in the just digitally, and I also wrote a bunch of like the LA best of, the best of LA yearly thing, which was pretty much just like whatever I was doing at the time was the best of LA. Like there was no actual research. So yeah. And at that time, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you want to know about this, but yeah, I definitely
Look, you
saw.
don't censor yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw what we would call the Longhouse take over very clearly in that year. And it's like I remember actually a meeting. There was a meeting. This was right in 2014, and it was like all the freelancers and all the writers, and we were in a room, and they were basically asking us. We had one editor in chief then who was awesome. She had just left. So we had this great editor in chief named Sarah Fensky, who was not super political. She just really liked like cool stories, right? And she was not trying to forward an agenda. I think she probably was actually like conservative deep down, but we never found out. But she was just like a very normal, like level-headed, cool, great editor. She loved me. And so I wasn't even a very good writer back then, but I did like lots of gonzo-y stuff. And she left. And this other woman took over, who was very much a political thinking person. And shortly after this new woman took over, there was all kinds of drama because everybody hated her. And then we had a meeting inside LA Weekly where it was like 12 of us or something in a room. It was the writers, it was the freelancers, and they were basically asking us like, what should we do? Like what should we cover? What are you guys interested in? Like, where are we taking LA Weekly from here? And this is back when LA Weekly was really good. I mean, LA Weekly has a Pulitzer, or I think like Jonathan Gold won a Pulitzer. Like this guy.
Yeah. Everyone knows Jonathan Gold. Yeah.
Yeah. And he made up even before Bourdain, he was doing this, local taco stand food thing. And I met him. He was great. So we really had a great reputation. It was the kind of thing where it was like people really cared about LA Week. People like read it everywhere. It was a big thing. And we go into this room, and I and a few of the other people there were like kind of more dominant than the other people, right? Like we were talking more, we were having more ideas. We were like, I was basically, I mean, who knows what it was like from the outside, but to me, it seemed like me and a couple other people were basically like, this is what we're going to do. And everybody was really excited. Everybody was like, yes, like, let's do this. Naturally, people, this is how people are. There's natural hierarchies that happen. And like, some people have more ideas than others. Some people are better leaders than others. And it was like, it was like going towards a place where we really had a cohesive vision. And it was like, we were going to kill it. And suddenly, like when the meeting was almost over, like, it became like they cut off all the steam and they said, no, now we need to stop what we're doing and we need to go around the circle and make sure everybody gets the exact same time to talk and that their ideas are treated exactly equal as everybody else, because it's not fair that, some people here are talking more and getting more space than the other people. So we had to basically do this like land acknowledgement type thing where everybody goes around and everybody's ideas are heard. And at the end of it, everybody's just kind of like voting on the ideas they like the best. And afterwards, I tried to go talk to this woman, Jill Stewart, who everybody hated. And she was like a very middle manager, like managing editor or something. And I remember like I tried to go in her office right after, And she was like, "Oh no, sorry, you're gonna have to wait behind like all these other people because you can't just walk in here and get my time." And it was very obvious to me that this was like, and the funny thing is, the same thing was happening at the ad agency I was working at, like before that. It was like you saw this like attitude, this, I mean, again, longhouse, I don't know if you know what that word means, but just this
Yeah,
like
yeah.
HRification, this like
Yes.
woke HRification coming in and just destroying quality, right? It stopped
Right.
being about quality. It started being about everybody in the room needs to have their exact 30 seconds of talking. And it was like very remedial, like participation trophy type of thinking.
How did what was it? I mean, I'm just gonna be blunt, but like, how
Yep.
many? What did the gender balance change? Were there suddenly more women than men?
So my theory about all this, and if you've listened to me on other podcasts, you'll hear me say this. My theory about all this is that at 2013, 2014, we reached a critical mass inside corporations and institutions where it tipped from being the middle manager, like the middle control, like the mass control mechanism, tipped from being men to women.
Yeah.
And it was like overnight almost. I mean, really, it took like a year. Everything switched over. And
Hmm.
it wasn't now, okay, boys will be boys. You get called into HR and tisk tisk. You shouldn't have done that. You offended this person, but not a big deal. It went from that to you're fired, or not only
Yeah.
are you fired, you can't be like that anymore. I saw the exact same thing happen at 72 and Sunny where I worked. It was like it went from like, you're not supposed to do that stuff, but we're a bunch of people, not even just boys will be boys. We're a bunch of people having fun, whatever, like it's still like the good stuff still some people are going to be more dominant, some people are going to be quiet. It went from that to like straight up kindergarten. You're judged by your behavior, you're not judged by your work anymore,
Huh.
type of thing. And again, what I want to clarify, I'm not blaming women for this. I'm not saying women, it's their fault, or I'm not saying it's like women aren't able to make good creative work. They certainly are. But an organization that is run by women is going to be different than an organization
Yes.
that is run by men.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't
I
matter. It's like, it's just the way it is. You
yes.
can,
Correct.
yeah, sorry.
I feel like that's like just a simple dynamic of the modern working world that's not taken on at all. Almost, it's like ignored.
Yeah.
If you even bring it up, you're a misogynist or something. But like, you're fundamentally, and I've witnessed this too in jobs. When there's an imbalance in favor of women, the workplace changes. That's a fact. That is just a fact. Anyone that's been in the work, I worked in around the same time you were doing that. I was in Mountain View, California, and I was working for like tech startups and stuff like that. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall with like I'm in the workplace, and uh, I remember one time at lunch I was talking about how I enjoyed driving fast, like just kind of like cutting up. And this girl in the office had this like conniption about how I was putting other people in danger, and like I remember that moment. I was like, oh man, if this is what it's going to be like working in this industry, I'm out. And within 6 months, I quit and moved back to Nashville and started kind of trying to do my own thing because of that reason. You feel hamstrung, like you can't, and like I was talking about. I think you saw when I was talking about the origins of Silicon Valley. Like frankly, it was all guys doing that. I don't. That's just a fact. It's just what it was.
Yeah.
But what? So I'm curious. So like I said, the Pamphleteer is kind of an attempt to revitalize this alt weekly model. And like what do you think the place is for something like that in a local place, like distinct from, it's different from a newspaper. We're not breaking news. We're kind of providing cultural analysis. We run a event calendar. We we do book reviews, talk to local artists, etc., restaurants, all that kind of stuff. it feels to me like the reason I was attracted to it back in like 2015, 2016, when I tried to raise money for a similar thing. It took me like 7 years and, changing careers multiple times to come back to it. But, to me, it was always like the alt weekly is kind of the best venue to shape the character of a city.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and I'm the Nashville scene here has lost that power. People ignore it because they've just gone off the rails and appeal to 1% of the population.
Yep.
I don't, I didn't ever work in an alt weekly. I just kind of observed them from the outside and saw the power. So I'm kind of curious what kind of like your view on what makes the alt weekly cultural publication in a specific local environment different from like a newspaper.
Well, I mean, yeah. So the iconic alt weekly was the Village Voice, and the Village Voice was New York, and that the Voice network actually owned the LA Weekly. So, like everything else,
they own the scene too.
Yeah, right. All the weeklies, like everything else, got hedge funded and became all one company, which was, of course, the beginning of the end, because as you're saying, the whole point of an alt weekly is to be a city centric magazine. It's where it's funded by the sex ads in the back of it.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's what it's really built on. And it's a free thing that has culture. And, Bukowski, my all-time favorite writer, came up writing for the alt weekly, I think, of LA, like the city paper, whatever that was. And he had a column called Notes of a Dirty Old Man. And that's how Bukowski came up. That's how he became a great writer, because he just had this weekly column in whatever the weekly was. And yeah, there's a million versions of these, but you used to be able to prop them up on advertising, and now you can't. So either they become a zombie. And what I mean by that is like a paper or a magazine that is propped up by, large estates of rich people, like Harper's, I think, is a MacArthur estate product. So they don't need to worry about making money. Or, this is very conspiratorial, but, I don't have any evidence of this, but you saw who was propping up Twitter internally. There's certainly some governmental incentive to keep the doors open of news sources that they can influence the outcomes of.
Definitely.
So like GQ is a zombie. It's not a real publication. Right. It doesn't make money. I mean, it's owned by Condé Nast, but Condé Nast has such a diverse, I think GQ is owned by Condé Nast. I'm not even sure, but it's owned by somebody. And
SoftBank or Condé Nast, right? Like that's
there's like two
properties.
Of them, right? Yeah. And they have such diverse income streams that they're not like selling ads and giving content. That's not what they do. It's a much more complicated set of things. So
in Nashville right now, the Nashville scene's owned by one of the more powerful politicians in town, who just stepped down and handed it down to his son, but it's kind of been passed around. And, at this point, it's got a bunch of like legacy infrastructure. They do like Burger Week, and then they do I think they do Taco Week, and then they'll do all these events that you have to pay for. But they've got this like, legacy advertising infrastructure, plus they're like historical, traditional events that kind of keep it propped up. But, so I used to work for the guy that started the alt weekly here after he'd sold it to Village Voice. And, this was at the time that I was like really curious about this idea of like a cultural city publication. And he used to tell me that like the goal of the alt weekly was what he wanted was like a thing that was like that thick. And when he threw it down on your coffee table, it made like a thud. It was like a dense piece of thing, and they had opinions all across the spectrum, and it's just covered in weird stuff. And he'd talk about how the sex issue would sell the most. The Nashville scene here doesn't do the sex issue anymore, of course, because if they did, they'd probably put like a tranny on the cover or something. Like it's like a completely different thing now. It's just like this. it's it's like that thin. I call it
Yeah,
toilet
right.
paper. I love to shit on it. It's like my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
Um,
No, and now it's just
but
fake. I mean, it's the same thing with the LA
yeah,
Weekly. It's now it's just it's fake. It's not even,
no.
there's nothing in there that anyone
No,
ever talks about in any way. It's
none of
totally
the
wrong.
writers
Yeah.
in the Nashville area like really understand Nashville. They're ideologues that go there to
Yeah.
write, and they're like you opposed this. Like why did you oppose this? And like you're advocating for this. You're evil. Like it's totally changed in character. Anyway, I'm done ranting about that. Well, so okay, so tell me about Will. I've seen some of y'all's work online, like some of the cool videos that y'all have put together, and I see that you're wearing a Will hat right
Right.
now.
Yeah.
And I'm okay. So there's like two questions I have as regards to Will. One, when you say dissident marketing agency, what do you mean? I'll ask the follow up after you answer that.
Well, it's so the actual like deeper meaning of it is I tend to represent brands and projects that are going against the hedge fund class in a certain way. And that way is generally coming from actual dissident action. So, a great example is my client Masa Chips.
Yep.
So,
Tan Man.
Tan Man, every chip in the supermarket is made with seed oils. Why is every chip made with seed oils? Because seed oils are super cheap. They're the very perfect example of globalism, right? Because they're eat the bugs, eat the, basically oil is that type of oil was made as like an engine oil, essentially. Right. But then they found like, oh, if we crush up all these tiny little shitty seeds, we can make an oil out of it. And it's the cheapest possible oil we could ever make, right? So let's just fucking put it in everything. And then, of course, it's horrible for you because it's just this disgusting low quality crap. It doesn't, it's just not good. And but it's lowest bidder. It's lowest bidder quality. Yeah. So what they've done is gone back to how chips used to be made, which was with beef tallow, which is, of course, much more expensive, but it's much better for you. And you feel completely differently. Like if you eat one of these Masa chips, it's totally different than eating a million of these crappy tortilla chips that you eat now. But of course, it's much more expensive. So I think I call this movement like the new natural. You see this everywhere now. You see like a return of meat everywhere, of beef organs. You see all this like return to how we used to eat. And I think that that's a reaction to these factory-made products that the reason they're made the way they are is because they're super cheap. They're super cheap to make it scale. And that nobody cares if they're bad for you. Nobody gives a shit about that. So that's just one example. But I think all the clients I have in some way or another, even like the tech ones, are kind of approaching the economy in this way of being like a dissident reactor against this like global hegemony of lowest bidder ingredients or lowest, SaaS programs that are just to scrape all your data and sell it and own you, that type of stuff. So that's why I call it dissident marketing.
So an article of yours that you wrote, and I passed, like my friends here in Nashville, we passed all this around, was the one you wrote for American Mind. We must seize the means of propaganda. Yeah. And the thing that resonated with me the most was the section where you talk about all the software that you have to use to do your job. And as someone who's worked in tech in a variety of capacities over the years, like I couldn't agree with that more. The way that I run the Pamphleteer is like we have a Google Doc and and Telegram. Like I don't do any of the like productivity maximizing shit because in my experience it just prevents work.
No, it's just busy work. I call them button clicking. It's just buttons.
Yeah.
It's
dude, like Jira.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Look, you talk in the morning. You're like, here's what you're working on today. And then I'm going to write it down and remember tomorrow and be like, hey, did you get this done? Like, why do you have to have a whole piece of fucking software for that?
It's so stupid.
It's
yeah,
insane.
and then you have to learn to use the software, and then that's your whole job. And this is the most longhouse thing in the world, because all of those people, they make it their job to do the process, and then the company is paying, Jira I guess is a SaaS, right?
Yeah, that's Atlassian. It's Atlassian, has Jira and all that shit.
All these stupid fucking names. And it's like they're paying them $50,000 a year to give them a button clicking machine so that everybody can seem like they're doing something. And that's the economy now.
I don't know why I shifted to that, but I think you mentioned something. But my most recent tech job, I worked for this AI company in Palo Alto, and like half the team's job was managing the management software. And so you would get an email and be like, hey, what's the update on this? And you would be like, I don't know. I'd spend all day responding to requests about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So, second question about Will, Dissident Marketing Agency. Were you involved with Hestia cigarettes?
Yeah, so we did some spec work for Hestia. We've been close with Hestia, and we love Hestia because they're like our I just love what David is doing so much. I think he completely gets it. He knows talk about a dissident brand. That's the most dissident brand you could ever have.
100%.
And that's because, why is it so dissident? It's dissident because tobacco in America has effectively been nationalized. So every single tobacco company is part of the same company, and that company, or you say two companies, and those two companies get taxed like 90% by the government, right? So it's like the government essentially owns those companies, right? The entire reason they exist is to pay money to the government from the sale of tobacco, because tobacco became unpopular enough that the people didn't care that tobacco was just getting taxed in that way. So Hestia is the first new cigarette brand in 20 years. And
really?
Because because the FDA has no incentive nobody wants to start a new cigarette brand because the government owns the cigarette brands. They don't want competition.
Who was the last one?
Before that? That's a good question. I actually don't even know.
It's been a while, though. It's the point.
Well, that's why everybody's so excited about Hestia, because when's the last time you've seen a new cigarette brand? You never did.
I remember when American Spirits kind of emerged, but it was like kind of out of the ether. It wasn't really like there was like a big... Hestia is very clearly like freshly approaching the subject. In Nashville we have Brutton's Snuff. Like, we have the smokeless tobacco headquarters of the world. Speaking of tobacco, have you ever been to Nashville?
No. So it's I've been almost everywhere in South. I hung out on the Gulf shores and went to Floribama and shit. I did my Southeast time. I just for some reason I've been to Tennessee. I've been to Lexington a couple times, and I just have.
You're thinking that's Kentucky?
Oh, sorry. I've been to what's the
Knoxville, Chattanooga,
Knoxville. Yeah, I've been to Knoxville a couple times, and but I just have never done Nashville or Memphis, and I really want to.
Memphis is pretty wild. They just elected. I mean, look, I'm not going to put up the video here because it would be me putting it up would be construed the right way. But maybe after the show, I'll send you the video of the guy that just won the mayor's race in Memphis, and you're going to laugh your ass off. I mean, Memphis is a whole other universe. Like, Tennessee is divided up into that's why we have 3 stars in the flag. It's like West, Middle, East Tennessee. Very radically different parts of the state. West Tennessee, like Old South. Middle Tennessee is kind of like the Mid South, New South era, and then East Tennessee is like Appalachia. So there's like a distinct divide in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, and this is why everyone's moving to Middle Tennessee, is because it's kind of the most palatable version of the South offered in Tennessee. Um,
And
yeah,
that's where Nashville's middle,
yeah, Nashville's middle.
and
Nashville's
Memphis
smack
is
dab in the middle.
also middle.
Memphis is west. Nashville, Knoxville, and then underrated one is Chattanooga down here on the
Yeah.
Georgia Tennessee line. A lot of
Yeah.
people like to, I've got a lot of friends that we probably have in common that live down there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so what's the question I have is so this whole idea of aligning with dissident brands, and the way that you define dissident as matzo chips, cooking their chips in tallow instead of seed oil is like a very material way to describe that. It seems similar to me. In the old world, you might have people just refusing to pay taxes because their government isn't honoring them. And then this new kind of like neoliberal, whatever you want to call it, capitalist landscape, it's like you vote with your dollar.
Yeah.
And so like, it seems like you're betting on that. You're betting on people voting with their dollar.
Well, you do vote with your dollar, right? I mean, yeah. And I think that you're seeing the reason why the economy we have this parallel economy growing, right? Is because people are realizing that their dollars that they're spending on shit that they never thought would be political at all, their paper towels, is being used to create propaganda that they completely disagree with and that disgusts them. And they're just waking up to that fact slowly but surely. I mean, it's taken a long time, but Bud Light was obviously the inflection point that was the working class of America had understood enough times that these brands that they thought would never weigh into these things were actually taking their money and doing woke shit with it. And they just said, oh, I don't want that. And so, yeah, I think that's I've never thought of it actually that way in the voting. It's like shifted to voting with your dollars. But yeah, like that's essentially, I think, the consciousness that has grown.
I'm gonna pull up a brand here that is that you have no relation to, that is doing this. Ultra Right beer.
Yep.
I would never buy this beer ever.
Yeah.
Like, just no offense. Like, I don't care. Like, great. I get it that you're like MAGA, whatever. I voted for Trump. Trust, I'm like, but 100 woke free American beers. So I'm curious your thoughts on the way that we've tried to position ourselves is kind of implicitly positioned against a lot of this stuff without signaling it. And I'm saying this on my stream, but without signaling the way that they are, because the ultimate task is persuasion. You want to attract people to what you're working on. You don't want to bludgeon them over the head and be like, you should buy this because it's right wing and this thing is woke. What do you think brands like this are doing wrong? Like, what?
I mean, it's a great question. First you should ask me, are they doing anything wrong?
Yes. Are they doing anything wrong?
But of course I agree with you. They are. So what are they doing wrong? Basically the other case example of this is Black Rifle Coffee, right?
Yes.
So what all my clients say is, we don't want to be Black Rifle Coffee. Why don't you want to be Black Rifle Coffee? Because Black Rifle Coffee is just the same white label, lowest bidder, horrible quality coffee. It's just painted with,
yes,
we care about guns, but they don't care about guns. Republicans, because
No,
when
they
actually the
don't.
rubber came to meet the road, they threw Rittenhouse under the bus, right?
Yep.
And it
Correct.
turns out that the CEO, oh, he's a veteran, but also he's some sort of hedonistic. And look, nothing's wrong with that either. But I'm just saying, like, he's a total not actual conservative guy.
Yes.
So he's just, he's a parasite. He's just, he's figured out how to do the same thing, but just sell it to the other audience, right?
Right.
And that's what this is doing. I mean, look at this fucking guy.
Conservatives will no longer complain about big corporations who use our money to.
I mean,
like,
Sean Weathers is a little light in the loafers, if you know what I mean. But
someone should check his hard drive, to be honest.
No, dude, we would not like what we saw, and I'm sure he's full grinder. But yeah, so again, like, yeah, all right, fine. He's found a way to brand some, I'm sure, terrible, disgusting beer that's worse than Bud Light, probably. But it just has, it's painted with Patriot colors, so therefore you should buy it. I mean, like, again, it's not the end of the world that he's doing that. I'd rather him be doing that than not doing that, right? I mean, it's a good sign that he's developing this market. I mean, he's tenderizing the market, which is good.
Yes. Yeah.
But yes, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to build reactive brands. The most reactive brand you could ever buy is like Masa, in that it is beautiful. Beauty, the mainstream, obviously, in their marketing, you can see they like it to be fat, disgusting people now. Therefore, just making something beautiful, that's all you need to do, right? Make it have great ingredients, make it beautiful, make it expensive. And that is more radical to me than just painting your shitty product with red, white, and blue colors and saying, like, this is the Patriot chip. What Masa is doing is much more radical and much cooler than that, I think. And Hestia also. I mean, Hestia is not, neither of those brands are right wing. They're not.
No.
They're just edgy and they're cool because they care about beauty. They care about the product. They care about the things that should matter in your product, and they're apolitical. Now, let me just be careful here, though. The thing that my advice to you in what you're doing, there's this desire media is different than of course. Media is not the same thing.
Correct.
There's a desire that I hear all the time, which is the other version. It's like the other side of the coin of ultralight beer, which is, we're just not political at all. Like, we don't care. We just want to be good, right? Like, we just want things to be good.
Yeah.
And the people that I hear saying that are lying.
Correct.
They're saying that because they don't want to take a stand. They're saying that because they're afraid to say what they actually think, right? And they're using the excuse of, I don't really care I don't care what your politics are. They're using that as an excuse instead of just fucking owning it, right? And let me just say, I did that too. When I launched Well, I launched it not as based, not as dissident, not as, right wing.
You wanted to be apolitical.
Yeah, I was like, oh, we just don't care.
Yeah.
We don't care. We accept everyone. Right? Like, we're just the real liberals, right? But that didn't work. And that didn't work. And now this version does work. And the reason that version didn't work is because I wasn't being honest. I wasn't being real to what I really believed and what I really cared about, So, yeah.
I feel, I've launching this, never tried to act like we weren't what we are. And I've never tried to say that we're like accept everyone or anything like that. Like, anyone that reads us, like, I think the thing that throws us off, do you know the Beck and Stone guys?
Yeah.
They designed our website. They did such a good job that we occasionally will put something out that's not necessarily political, like a movie review, or we'll write about something kind of contrary to the prevailing orthodoxy in the city. And it'll attract some readers that after reading us for a couple of newsletters unsubscribe because they figure out what we're about. So like we've never tried to. I've never tried to like. I started this thing like I've read enough Nietzsche to know that like the whole concept of like unbiased opinions is this nearly impossible goal to achieve, and so we own our bias. Like media is totally different than what you're working on. You're right.
Well, it's not totally different. I mean, the reason why I want to do what I'm doing is because I want to, like, look, this is most media projects in the space that I've seen have failed because they're not serious about the advertisers. My goal with Will is to build the advertisers and then build the media on top of the advertisers, not vice versa. Not build the media first and then wait around for the advertisers to show up that don't exist. You have to have the advertisers first, and then you can build the media on top of it.
Hey, okay, look, we're coming up at the end of this. Stick around. No, you're fine. You're just like you're giving me ideas that I can't talk about on air.
Okay.
Will you stick around for 10 minutes?
Can I call? Can we talk on my phone though?
Yeah. Will you drop your phone in the private chat there? I just have an idea. It's copacetic with what I'm working on right now. Isaac, thanks for chatting, man. We'll talk soon.
Of course, man. Thanks.
All right, I'm gonna drop you down.
All right.
Oh. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. That's episode 12, Office Hours. We'll see you guys next week.